Good morning. I am live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Rumble. For those who don't know me, my name is Catherine Vitale. I was a candidate for Boston City Council at Large last year in 2023, and I will be hopefully a candidate again in 2025. I'm a homeschooling mom. I've been an activist for the past 3 years, and around December 2021, January 2022, myself and a few other individuals started protesting Boston Mayor Michelle Wu because of her strict vaccine mandates that she had for Boston City workers. She got elected into office in November of 2021, and then in December of 2021, she immediately announced the new vaccine mandates for all the city workers. She was taking away their testing option for COVID-19 and forcing them to either get the vaccine or lose their job. So, our protesting her vaccine mandates led to protesting her dictatorship, essentially, because we were so effective in our protesting and direct action against her, and we embarrassed her on a national, sometimes international level. She went so far as to get the Boston City Council to pass a anti-free speech ordinance, picketing ordinance, to essentially ban us from protesting in front of her house. And we're still in court now, 2 years after being arrested for protesting in front of her house. And we just got a decision from the judge last week on our motion for selective prosecution. It was denied, as expected, because the courts are corrupt, the judges are corrupt, everybody works hand in hand with each other against the people and against the Constitution. So we don't ever expect victories for free speech in our district courts over here. But subscribe to my YouTube account, People's Press Media, and make sure that you like and comment on the videos so that they gain interaction, to gain visibility, so that more people can understand what is happening to free speech across the country. But because I'm sure situations like this are happening all over, but specifically this is what's happening in Boston, and people need to be aware that this is happening. So please, however you can interact with the video or subscribe to my channels, please do so that we can get more visibility. Today, I'm going to be playing the public hearing that took place on March 14th, 2022, to hear the public's opinion on the passage of this ordinance. For the record, I'm well aware that public hearings are just for show, and the selected officials don't actually take into account what the public says. They just, have to play the game and go through the motions of the processes. But it is still important to give testimony because, you have it on record that you were opposed to such things, and nobody could ever say that you felt differently. Typically, when I go live at this time, I get up to 100 or sometimes 200 viewers, but I understand I'm up against Karen retrial today. It's 9 o'clock. That thing just started, so I'm probably not going to get any viewers live. So please, later in the day, if you can, come back, share this video out, watch the replay. Hopefully I'll get some more interaction on the replay because everybody's watching Karen read today. And I just want to also point out before I start to play the hearing that, situations like Karen Reed wouldn't be able to happen if we actually dealt with everyday corruption when we see it. Almost every single thing that happens with the police, the elected officials, and the courts is corrupt. And people are just so used to things being that way that they overlook it or look past it or think that there's nothing that we can do to change it. But the point is that nobody ever says anything about it. Nobody ever does anything about it. And if we did, then we wouldn't get to the level of some innocent person being framed for murder. And a bunch of people on their high horse thinking that they can cover up a murder, right? So I'm going to play the hearing. I'm going to have some commentary during it. This is the conversation that took place before the and then probably tomorrow I'm going to play the working session that took place without the public present, to talk to the legal team and all that about the ordinance, because this is a very anti-constitution, anti-free speech ordinance that we have here in Boston. And the funny thing about it is that the police refer to it as the policy regarding the mayor's house. Okay, this is not a city ordinance that is applied across the city. This is a policy that is applied and enforced only at the mayor's house. So this is 100% an anti-constitution, self-serving, anti-free speech ordinance that we have in the city of Boston. Okay, so I'm going to start with the hearing. It was chaired by Ricardo Arroyo, who at the time was a Boston City Councilor. He is no longer a Boston City Councilor, although I don't think that his replacement is any better. But yeah, he was the chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Government Operations. And so he held this hearing. We did approach him in person 5 days before this hearing and kind of plead with him to do it in person because we were concerned. We're very much against these virtual meetings and hearings because they're able to mute people, they're able to kick people out, they're able to block people from coming in, and they're able to disable the chat section, which all of those things should be considered violation of open meeting law, because in an open meeting, if we were in person, they wouldn't be able to mute us. Sure, they'd be able to remove us, to have us removed if we were causing a disruption. However, people would still get to hear what we say before we walk out of the room without us being muted. And the chat section is just like, if you're there in person, you'd be able to talk to the other members of the public that are there. You'd be able to see how many people are opposing or supporting this. You'd be able to talk to your neighbors, and you can't do that in a virtual setting, especially when they shut off the chat function, which they do 90% of the time. Probably even more than that. But okay, let's get started. Hold on. Nope. Here we are.
The committee referred to the committee on March 2nd, 2022. The docket will be sponsored by the mayor. In accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirements that public bodies conduct its meetings in public place, that it is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom, and it is being recorded. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to public health accommodations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/citycounciltv and on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, Verizon 964. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at cc.go@boston.gov. And will be made a part of the record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of this hearing. I am joined by my council colleagues this morning: Councilor Aaron Murphy, Councilor Lucy Louis-Jen, Councilor Kenzie Bach, Councilor Liz Braden, Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, Councilor Michael Flaherty, and Councilor Julia Mejia. We are also joined by Chief Brianna Miller from the Office of Community Engagement. Before I give my council colleagues the chance to give their introductory remarks, I'd like to mention that the committee received a letter from the law department and were invited to participate in this hearing. That letter was sent out to councilors this morning, will be included as part of the public record. The department cites a similar ordinance, which was upheld in the case of Frisbee v. Schultz and found to be lawful. That case sets the standard for this kind of legislation. The department specified that the ordinance before this body is not content specific and leaves open channels of communication. The department also reiterated that the goal is to protect the privacy of residents in their homes. Now, by order of arrival, I'll turn over to my council colleagues, starting with, I believe Councilor Murphy may be here, but I received a phone call from her this morning. So Councilor Rusi Louis-Jen, if you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for everyone for being here. I look forward to listening to this conversation. I'm at large City Councilor Rusi Louis-Jen, here looking forward to this conversation on the ordinance. As we all know, the right to join with others in protest is critical to our democracy. It's critical to fighting for change, for the common good, and is a core First Amendment principle. But even before our Constitution, we have the Mass Constitution that says people have a right in an orderly and peaceable manner to assemble, to consult upon the public good. So we know that the right to protest, the right to assemble, is a crucial legal, cultural, political protection, especially for dissenting and marginalized groups like abolitionists, suffragists, religious groups, labor and civil rights groups. But it's not completely unconditional. And the government can impose content neutral, reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. And we shouldn't take any of these restrictions lightly. And I don't take this ordinance lightly at all. But I do believe, and potentially there's room for change, but the ordinance is narrowly tailored, banning targeted residential protests only from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. It's narrow both in scope. A protest focused on one person's home, and as it should, as anything on the First Amendment should, sparks rigorous debate. And so I look forward to hearing from all of you regarding this ordinance. So thank you, Mr. Chair, again.
Okay, so I'm just going to chime in here. You're going to hear a lot throughout this hearing and throughout all of the conversations about this ordinance that it is content neutral. It's not content specific. It's not content based. It 100% is not content neutral. They're liars. This ordinance was created and passed to ban a very specific group of people from protesting very specific topics against a very specific person. It was passed to protect Michelle Wu from having to hear from her constituents about how displeased they were about her vaccine mandates. Of course, the protesting about Michelle Wu evolved into many different things over the past couple of years. There have been many different issues that people have taken up with Michelle Wu. But it started because of the vaccine mandates, and she didn't want to be embarrassed. She didn't want to have to face the people who were unhappy with her policies, and she played the victim. She let people think that she was being, harassed, and her family was being harassed, and people were saying hateful things, that the people protesting her were racist and hateful and Asian hate, and all of these lies that are true about nobody that protested in front of her house. It was strictly about policy, had nothing to do with race. And there were many races and different types of people that were protesting in front of her house. So for her to say that it had anything to do with race or hate or anything like that is bogus. And the media and the city council went right along with it. And you're going to hear them talk about allegations that we harassed her. Well, the thing is, if she was being harassed, why didn't she ever go to the police station or to the courthouse to file for harassment prevention? They had all of our names. So she wasn't being harassed, because if she were, she could have taken it to court and actually filed charges against us for harassment. We were protesting her just like any other protest has ever happened like against an elected official. And when the protest started in front of her home, it was because we specifically went to her house because she shut down City Hall for 2 weeks. So, then these people will talk about that we were there every day. We were never there every day. We were there maybe 1 to 3 times per week, if that. And, right, Sean, they're liars. So it very much has to do with our content. And you hear that. And these city councilors, this is the thing, they're so stupid. Like, I hate to insult people like that, even people that I don't like. I try not to call names or insult people's intelligence, but it comes out when they speak how ignorant and stupid they are, because laws are never supposed to be based on one situation or to protect one person or to target one person or one group of people. And every single time one of these city councilors talks about this ordinance, they're talking about the situation at Michelle Wu's house. So you can say that it's content neutral all you want, but just the simple fact that you are talking about one specific situation shows that it's not content neutral. Anyway, go on.
Thank you. We're going to go to Councillor Kenzie Bott.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you everyone for being here. I'd echo Councillor Louis-Jean's comments. I think that this is a super important area. I think that the First Amendment is critical for all of us, and that I appreciate the fact that I do think that the ordinance that's been put before us is a very narrowly tailored time, place, and manner restriction, and that's the only framework in which this council should be looking at something like this. But I do appreciate the work that went into drafting it, and looking forward to hearing the public comment today. Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Councillor Braden. Councillor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, the floor is yours if you'd like to make an opening comment.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairman, and everyone for being here for this process. I have to say that I'm still thinking about its specifics to this, the adjustments or what the mayor has proposed, and I'm still kind of on the fence and thinking about in terms of, can we make these adjustments and to those specifics. So I want to listen to the testimonies today and just observe and hopefully make the right decision.
Thank you, Councillor Fernandez-Anderson. Councillor Flaherty, and I just want to note that we've been joined by Councillor.
To the hearing, I obviously want to echo the comments of our colleague, Councillor Bach, and also recognize that we may have an opportunity here. We may want to insert some sunset clause just to make sure that it doesn't go completely different direction. So narrowly tailored amendment, I guess, to the time, place, and manner is appropriate. The sunset clause may give us further assurance that it won't infringe further on folks' rights to exercise their speech and etc. So look forward to hearing testimony, and we'll participate as we proceed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Braden, I see that your camera is now on. Are you ready for an opening statement, or do you want me to come back to you?
I'm having some technical difficulties, but yes, I can do a verbal without the camera.
That's fine.
Oh, good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be at this hearing this morning. I think it's time to have a conversation about public protests in residential neighbourhoods close to homes, and I look forward to hearing everyone's point of view this morning and hearing from the different departments, especially the law department, on their take on this. I have to read the communication that was sent by email, but I hope to catch up on all that very soon. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. It's Councillor Mejia, followed by Councillor Lara, followed by Council President Edflin.
Thank you to the chair for holding this hearing. You know, as an elected official, I've had my fair share of harassing tweets and threatening voicemails, Zoom bombings, people screaming at me in the streets, and so on. And I come at this with a great deal of personal and professional lived experiences. It's part of the job. So I think as elected officials, there's often an impulse to want these kind of ordinances. But when you really look at the fine print of an ordinance like this, you find that it really doesn't line up with the number of values we consider to be so important. And in full transparency, I have had fundamental problems with this ordinance because I couldn't support it without compromising my values as a champion for all means all. First, I'm on organizers of color. Second, I'm concerned that using the police to enforce an ordinance like this, we have seen how the police in the past have cracked down disproportionately on organizers of color, LGBTQ organizers as well. Finally, I'm concerned about creating legislation just for the sake of legislation. We already have a noise ordinance and permitting laws for organizing. So if we are seriously concerned about picketing, we have a number of ordinances to fall back on. As a neighbor and as a single mom who lives with her whole family, I get the impulse to want this ordinance. But we can't be impulsive with our values as elected officials. So I'm here to listen and learn more from the administration. But unless we have some major fundamental changes to this ordinance, I am going to struggle to support this measure. So I'm really hoping that we can find some compromise here on ways that we can move this forward, as well as ensure that democracy continues to thrive. Thank you.
Question: would you a website for a major brand with more than 200 million users using Wix?
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Lara.
Thank you, Chair. I want to start off by saying that my stance on this issue does not come from a lack of empathy for what's been happening outside of Mayor Wu's house and the impact that it's had on her neighbors, the children, and the veterans who live nearby. Similar to Councilor Mejia, I have also been on the receiving end of that level of harassment, to the point where I wasn't allowed to go door knocking or into certain neighborhoods on my own for a while during the campaign because of the threats. These folks have, Mayor Wu's neighbors have been subjected to the racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic messages of the protest for well over 9 weeks now. And so I definitely understand that we're at a impasse. We have received dozens of complaints through 311 via email, on social media, from neighbors who, like me, have realized that this group has been violating the city's already existing ordinances without intervention. Mainly the noise ordinance, blocking of the street, disturbing the peace, all of those have been violated, and in a well-documented manner by this group. The bottom line is that the ordinance is repetitive.
Okay, so spoiler, Kendra Lara and Julia Mejia both voted no, not to pass the ordinance. However, Kendra Lara, as you're going to hear right now, just wanted to change the wording and just wanted to be more specific. She was actually upset about the fact that it's illegal to pass legislation that is not content neutral. So that was her issue with it, was that she actually specifically wanted to target us, but that's not legal. So that was what her issue was, that there were going to be unintended consequences for the types of protests that she supports. Appreciate the no vote from a weird place where she actually wanted them to be harder on specifically us, right? And she's saying these lies, and that's what politicians do now, is they lie through their teeth. And honestly, she doesn't even know she's lying, it seems. Okay, she thinks the stuff coming out of her mouth is legit and genuine. Okay, and that's what's even scarier. It's one thing when somebody's lying and they know they're lying. But when somebody is just spewing shit that they heard or that somebody told them to say, and they think that it's the truth when it's a bold-faced lie, that's scary, okay? That's when I call a person stupid. Like, you have no brain of your own. You're literally a repetitive robot for the establishment, and you think that you are some champion for the resistance of some sort. She does. She thinks that she's a warrior. She's been an activist for a really long time. That's how she got into politics. Again, she's not on the city council anymore, but her replacement isn't much better. And she thinks that she's above the law, and she has actually been treated like she's above the law. And she thinks that she's like some groundbreaking activist turned politician turned back to activist, and she's stupid. She doesn't get it. She's saying right here where I just paused it, she's saying that it's clear and documented that we have already broken existing ordinances. No, it's not, dude, because we would have been charged with breaking those ordinances if that were the case. We would have been cited, at least. We never broke any law or ordinance at all. Even when we got arrested, we weren't breaking any law or ordinance. Okay? Like I've said, I'll say a million times, your lawnmower doesn't have more rights than I do. If you can run a lawnmower at 7 a.m., I can stand in the street and bang on a pot or yell at the top of my lungs or blow a whistle or shake a cowbell. I can do all of those things because the First Amendment is way more important than a lawnmower or a jackhammer or any type of construction equipment or demolition equipment, that all of those things can be done at 7 a.m. Okay? I can be in the street yelling, whether I annoy you, whether you don't like my messaging, whether it doesn't matter, because that's my right as it is yours. And so basically Kendra Lara's whole thing is just that she's mad that we're not being charged with anything thus far. Because she thinks that we have broken or ordinances, which we haven't, because we would have been charged. Trust me, if they had a way to get us, they would have already gotten us.
Infringes on people's right to assemble peacefully. And while we're trying to solve a temporary issue, the unintended consequences will no doubt disproportionately impact marginalized communities who use civil disobedience and direct action as tactics to help secure civil rights. We can't trust that the ordinances are going to be enforced, as none of the others have. And given the data that we have about over-policing of Black and Brown communities, we can't trust that they're going to be enforced equitably. Boston has a vibrant youth organizing and housing justice movement, both of which, based on the time limitations offered by the ordinance, you'll be risking fines by protesting before school hours, planning eviction blockades, or stopping foreclosure auctions, all of which typically happen in the wee hours of the morning. I hope that the testimony at the hearing today helps make it clear to my colleagues that this ordinance has the potential to be incredibly problematic for marginalized communities. It creates an opportunity to criminalize organizers by way of fines, and it creates an information gathering mechanism that could be weaponized as surveillance later on. I don't think that this is a risk that we should take. It's an unnecessary risk. And I look forward to hearing from the public and making amendments that are in alignment with the feedback we hear from our constituents. Our office will be offering these kinds of amendments similar to the sunset clause that Councilor Flaherty brought up, and amendments that will make it more explicit to what protests are and are not included in the ordinance in order to work to minimize harm. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. President Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues that provided positive testimony in different perspectives, and I respect everybody's opinion and perspective, and the perspectives you bring in really adds to the discussion in the subject matter. So just want to say thank you to my colleagues. I've also, like Mayor Llewellyn, I also had protests at my house as the city council president, but also when my father was mayor as well. And when the protest, let me just say briefly, when the protest was at my house, there was a young woman with little kids, two little kids, two girls, maybe 7 or 9 or so, and she came up to me after the protest was gone, and she said to me, "Councilor Flynn, I can really understand why young people don't being subjected to that type of harsh criticism, calling someone a communist or a traitor." And then it was even more despicable what they were calling Mayor Wu, a mother of 2 little kids. And, we want people to get engaged in politics and to run for office. But can you imagine a young mother or a young father that wants to run for office with little kids telling their spouse, I want to put my name on the ballot, but we may have to endure this type of brutal criticism. So certainly I agree with my colleagues, there should be a balance, and there's room for compromise. I think the administration is willing to compromise with us, with the city council, and we would compromise with the administration. But I think there should.
It's kind of like how, imagine working at a career for a number of decades and then having to tell your family that if you don't take this experimental jab that you don't feel comfortable taking, you're going to be terminated from your career. Kind of like that. You're not going to be able to provide for your family anymore because of an unjust government mandate. Something like that. Imagine being that parent, because I wasn't that parent, but those people are the people that we were advocating for when we were protesting. And that's why it's that serious. I don't care how you feel about vaccines. Okay. People lost careers. Okay. No, now nobody ever got fired because of the Boston vaccine mandate, as far as I know, because of all of the public scrutiny that went against it. They never actually got to the point. There was an injunction in court, and I think that the mandates were over by the time everything ended. So I don't think anybody actually got fired, but I'm 100% sure that it was because of the public scrutiny, and because of all of the efforts of all of the people, including hugely us, who made it so public, that stopped people from getting fired. But people moved out of the city. People moved out of the state. We definitely lost thousands of public workers, first responders, because of the mandate. People who just up and left because they didn't have it in them to fight it. They felt like they couldn't afford to be unemployed at any point in time. So instead of letting it get to that point, they just up it. So the mandate didn't even have to do the job and get rid of them. It was them who just up and left and said, I'm not running the risk. I'm not running the risk of injecting myself, and I'm not running the risk of losing my job over it. I'm just going to leave. Okay. I've even spoken to police officers in other cities and towns in the state of Massachusetts that didn't have these strict vaccine mandates. And they've said, I used to be a Boston police officer, but I came here. I picked up and left Boston because of the vaccine mandates. Now I'm working as a police officer in this other district. So, when you call 911 in Boston and your emergency services aren't getting to you in time because every single department in Boston is severely understaffed, aside from the medical conditions and the deaths that the jab has caused, it's because people just left those jobs because they didn't want to deal with a vaccine mandate, and they didn't want to deal with being unemployed because of it. So they just left and got new jobs elsewhere. But go on Ed Flynn and talk about poor Michelle Wu. And what he's talking about was when at one point, it was on her birthday. One point, somebody yelled out in front of her house, "Happy birthday, Hitler." Okay, they called her Hitler. Get over it. Like, whatever happened to sticks and stones, honestly. Words will never hurt you. Get over it.
Should be some type of reasonable restrictions on demonstrating in public.
There already
in the
are. It's
homes
called a
of,
noise ordinance. 11
public
p.m. to 7
officials.
a.m.
You know, if you're demonstrating at 5 o'clock in the morning,
We
there
weren't.
might be a little kid
We
next
were
to the
never out
elected
there at 5
official
o'clock in the morning.
that's trying to get to sleep.
We never
ready
started
to wake
before
up
7
another
a.m.
hour for school. There might be a senior citizen that's having trouble sleeping, or a veteran with PTSD that might be dealing with sleeping issues. Or there
Then they might want to be
might
out
be
there with
a
us.
nurse that worked the overnight shift that needs some sleep. So, public protest has to have some limits. And
We do.
it's
11
about
p.m. to 7
respect
a.m.
for your neighbors. It's a respect for your community, being decent people.
But
And if
lawnmowers and
you want to
construction companies
protest,
don't need to give them the same
we
respect.
can accommodate you, but there has to be some respect on the protesters as well. My opinion might not be, people might agree with it, but that's just how I feel personally. So hope it's helpful to the discussion, not saying I'm right or I'm wrong, but that's just my own personal opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council President. And I'll just say in my opening that I also believe that this is a narrowly tailored ordinance. It gives people 12 hours of the day to do this. It doesn't actually remove them from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So that's 50% of the day. You can pick it out of somebody's house if you so choose. And I will just say, as the child of someone who was in elected office and understands, sort of like Council President Flynn said, your parent being challenged in that way. I remember back in the time of land phones, picking up the phone to death threats when my father was opposed to the Iraq War. And so there have been a number of instances like that. And I know that those things weigh heavy on everybody here in the sense that we all run for office. We all put our names on ballots. We are all, I think, frankly, very comfortable with engaging with constituents and see that as part of our job. I don't see that as the job of my neighbors. I don't see that as the job of family members who did not do that. I don't see that as the job of other folks who don't hold these spaces. And so in the places where we are able to create some civility, to try to create some way to ensure that engagement is respectful, I think we should. And so, from where I'm at, there will be working sessions on this, obviously on language and things of that nature. But I do believe that 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. Or rather 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. is accommodating. For the sake of time, because we have a hard stop with Chief Miller at 11, I want to go to Chief Miller, and then we will go back to the council through the council in order of arrival for questions, and then we will go to community comment. And so, Chief Miller, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brianna Malore, and I'm the Chief of Community Engagement for the City of Boston, Mayor Michelle Wu. Thank you, Chairman Arroyo, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to the entire council for having me here and allowing me to listen to your comments and concerns. And I definitely look forward to bringing back what we discussed today to the administration. And I'm here to listen to all the comments and concerns with the mission to create a stronger ordinance through a working session. Mayor Wu filed this ordinance regarding targeted residential picketing to preserve the residents' rights to be heard while ensuring they do not interfere with the quality of life of our Boston neighborhoods. When picketers target individuals and families and residents, particularly with the intentions to disrupt their way of life, it negatively affects the entire neighborhood.
Okay, Brianna. So for those of you who don't know, this is Brianna Malore. She is literally the reason why Sean Nelson was tackled to the ground by Boston police and arrested at Ronan Park on June 19th. Was it June 19th or June 22nd? June 22nd, right? 2022. She was the one who went over and told the police to make him stop. And to make him stop, they tackled him to the ground. Stop yelling. That's all he was doing, was yelling in a public park. And he got tackled to the ground. So yeah, it's Brianna Malora. I think she is the chief of constituent engagement, somebody tell me what her title is in the comments, please. But she works for Wu's office, and that's why she's in this hearing, I guess, is because she's the representative there from Wu's office. And she's going to talk about how this picketing ordinance is basically to protect the privacy rights and, you know, the quality of life for residents in the city of Boston and the neighbors who have to deal with all this noise and blah, 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 blah. First of all, most of Michelle Wu's neighbors can't stand her, and we're rooting on us. They just won't say that out loud because, like many people are scared of retaliation. People are scared of losing their jobs. The city of Boston employs so many people that probably a majority of her neighbors work for the city, and they don't want to have to worry about retaliation. So they're not going to speak out against her, but they did agree with us, and they were glad that we were there. They went around and they canvassed her neighborhood to find neighbors that would participate in a meeting and that would be you know, on the hook to be present during a protest, to call 911, to say that they were disturbed by the noise we were making. Like, this whole thing was strategically planned out. They orchestrated the whole thing to get us arrested, to silence us, and to deter other people from coming to protest, because they use us as an example of what happens when you do this type of thing, right? So Brianna Malora is in this hearing saying whatever stupid shit she's saying that is completely false, invalid. They don't give a shit about the neighbors, okay? Because they made the point of the ordinance was to basically tighten the noise ordinance, first of all. But the picketing ordinance doesn't say anything about noise. So let's start there. Nothing about noise. If I just went and stood out in front of Michelle's house, not even holding a sign, and just stood there silently, then they could text me for that. Okay. That's how broad the ordinance is. Okay. It says zero about noise. It's not about noise at all. It's about Michelle Wu having to see and hear dissent from her constituents. That's what it's about. It has nothing to do with noise. Please go read the text of the ordinance if you want to tell me that it has anything to do with noise, because it doesn't. Okay, and that's what Brianna Malora is talking about. The noise disrupting the neighbors when they're trying to sleep. Like, that's what the noise ordinance is for. Okay? We never started before 7 a.m. And I'm going to keep repeating, if you can mow your lawn, or you can do construction, or you can do work in the streets at 7 a.m., then I can yell in the streets at 7 a.m. and I can bang on a pot in the streets at 7 a.m. So whatever, Brianna Malora gets paid like a ridiculous amount of money to do a whole lot of shilling for Michelle Wu. And her mother works for the city too. So there's that.
And it's our most vulnerable residents that are deeply impacted by these attacks. So specifically the elderly and children. The protests then become a very big quality of life issue. They interrupt the residents' ability to live healthy, happy, and comfortably in the privacy of their own homes, and everyone deserves that right. This ordinance will not prevent people from being able to protest or have their voices heard. Residents will still have the right to protest outside someone's home if they choose to do so. The protest simply places reasonable limitations on that. As a community, we should be considerate of the impacts we have on our neighbors, and adding these necessary parameters protect the health and well-being of every single resident in our neighborhoods that are targeted by harassment and targeted attacks, while preserving their right to protest. Again, thank you to the entire council for having me here today, and thank you all.
Thank
Well,
you,
thanks to you.
Chief Miller. I now want to go to councilors in order of arrival for questions. I believe Councilor Kenzie Bach, followed by Councilor Braden, are the next two that are here.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I have any questions for Chief Miller. I think that I appreciated the letter from the law department, and it's consistent with when I first read the ordinance. That what I went and did was sort of read the legal background on this and try to get a sense of where it fell, and that was part of for me coming to the conclusion that it is narrowly tailored and very much kind of consistent with the tradition that the Supreme Court has upheld. One is just that I don't think fundamentally that there's any reason why this ordinance would operate differently from the noise ordinance. And I'm aware that the noise ordinance, is often seen as not enforced. And there are good reasons and bad reasons for that. But I do think that there is some norm setting that happens with the noise ordinance, like the notion that from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., we're asking people to do different things differently because of their neighbors and the fact that we live all squeezed together here in the city. And I think this is in a similar vein. And I also don't think we've seen criminalization out of the noise ordinance and the kind of slippery slope stuff we're talking about. So to me, this is about establishing a norm, particularly about thinking about those residents who happen to live near elected officials and other potential targets. But I don't see a reason why it would operate differently from the noise ordinance in terms of these unintended consequences. And then the other thing I would just note is I would have a kind of legal concern about the sunset proposal. I think that it's super important that this is content neutral. And I think that a very narrowly limited time period would suggest that it was targeting a particular set of protests. And I think it's really important that this council not endorse something along those lines. And I also don't think it would withstand legal scrutiny. So I just want to flag that as a legal concern about a sunset proposal.
Right. So I think that I had walked away when Michael Faraday was talking about a sunset clause. So, which again makes it even more, I'm inclined to say hilarious because like you have to laugh or you're going to cry type of thing, right? At how stupid these people are. So you're going to tell me in the same breath that this is content neutral, while at the same time suggesting there be a sunset clause. So for those of you who don't know what a sunset clause is, that means like a piece of legislation that expires, basically. Like it's only valid for a certain amount of time and then it gets revisited and then they decide whether or not to keep it going. So basically, they suggested having a sunset clause because everybody knows that the whole point of this ordinance was to get rid of the protesters in front of Michelle Wu's house. Therefore, let's put a sunset clause on it because once they've stopped and gone away, or once the mandates are done and over with, we won't have to worry about these people anymore. And we can just get rid of the law because the law does violate the First Amendment. And we don't really want an ordinance like this. We just want to get rid of the people from in front of Michelle Wu's house. So like, let's just establish this legislation to get rid of those people. And then once the mandates are done, we can get rid of this law. Like, there's a thing about like having these conversations like behind closed doors where Ricardo Arroyo is actually, because he's a lawyer, so he seems like he's like, no guys, shut up. We don't want to talk about this publicly because it's making us look bad. It's going to make us look like we're trying to target these people, which is exactly what we're trying to do, but we're not supposed to say that publicly, right? And then you have fucking Flaherty and Kenzie Bach and fucking everybody else having these conversations publicly as if they're not aware of how legislation is supposed to work, how the Constitution works, and how like the government is not supposed to specifically target people just because they disagree with them. Like they don't get it. They don't get it at all. So it's like, it's funny, but it's scary at the same time because they're just stupid.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I was waiting for the working session, but you are absolutely correct, Councilor Bach, that would not pass legal scrutiny if we did a sunset clause due to the contact-specific nature of it. Councilor Louis-Jen is back on.
Due to the
We'll go to Councilor Braden for any questions or comment, and then to Councilor Louis-Jen, followed by Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any questions or comments at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Louis-Jen, followed by Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question for the administration. Given that there are like currently laws on the books such as nuisance and disturbing the peace ordinances that could be enforced but haven't been enforced, you know, I'm curious as if whether the administration has insight as to why those aren't being enforced.
Because we weren't breaking any
laws.
laws.
Among a lot of folks that if these were protests, either BLM protests at this hour, or if, you know, the crowd of protesters look differently given the racialized nature of policing and also of criminal, you know, who we presume to be guilty, that those ordinances would have been enforced. So can you give us any insight as to why that's not happening here and why there's a need for this additional ordinance to get some enforcement?
Thank you for your question, Counselor. On all enforcement questions, I definitely do defer to the Boston Police Department, but ultimately this ordinance talks specifically about targeting someone's residence and someone's person.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
And so we can...
yeah, nothing was being enforced because there was no need to enforce anything on law-abiding people. Laws. You hear that from the Boston Police Superintendent, I think, Bailey, tomorrow when I play the working session, that nobody has been arrested or charged with anything because they haven't committed any crimes. So, or made any civil infractions. They've done nothing against the law. Unfortunately, we've been unable to silence these people because they are 100% law-abiding citizens. As opposed to when people were protesting at Marty Walsh's house back in 2020 at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Nobody ever wants to talk about that. The BLM people protesting at Marty Walsh's house when he was the mayor in 2020 at 4 o'clock in the morning, making all types of noise, going up to his house, all around his house, when people were doing the same thing at Frank Baker's house, I think in 2020, setting firecrackers off in front of his house. I think at one point there was a fire in the bush around his house. I don't know if anybody was ever arrested for that. They weren't passing any ordinances to protect Marty Walsh or Frank Baker. And Marty Walsh and Frank Baker would have been against it. So, you know, not that I think any more highly of those two than I do of Michelle Wu or any of these people, because I don't. But at least Frank Baker with this ordinance did actually stand on the side of free speech and say that this ordinance was encroaching on free speech and that it was self-serving for the mayor. And I appreciate that he said that. I just wish that he put more work in defending free speech than what he did. But the point is, people were actually committing crimes when they were protesting those people outside, like violating the noise ordinance and everything else. And we weren't. So when you want to compare us to BLM people in marginalized communities, blah, 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 I am a fucking marginalized community. Then that's why, because they were breaking laws. Then, well, we are not breaking any laws. So that's the difference here.
I'm going to take questions for BPD and actually send them to BPD. So if folks have questions for BPD like that, we will send that to BPD for answers. So thank you, Councilor Louis-Jen. Do you have any other questions?
Hey, Councilor
No, that's
Royal.
all for now.
Oh.
Yes, President Flynn.
That's how it goes.
No, I didn't mean to jump ahead of anybody. I apologize about that.
You're good. You're
Okay. Chair Royal, obviously this is on television and the public is watching, but can you explain the term sunset provision? I have a good understanding of what it is. Not totally, I'll be honest. It's not totally. Explain.
Certainly. A sunset provision is a legal provision that provides the automatic termination of the ordinance. In other words, it would be you sunset it and we would have to act again affirmatively to renew it, essentially. So if we pass this with a sunset provision, what that would mean is it's active or a valid law up to a deadline, and then it would sunset and expire. So that's the definition of a sunset provision.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Royal, and
Thank you for calling that out. I'm not sure everybody knows what the sunset provision is.
Yeah, I had an understanding of it, but not totally. So I'm glad you were able to expand on that a little bit. The other issue I wanted to highlight is, the protesting out in front of anyone's house, whether it's a mayor or a council or a state representative, and it's legal to do that. It certainly costs public taxpayer dollars as well. There has to be a police response to that, and that's part of the public protest. So when we have a handful of people that want to protest out in front of my house or the mayor's house or someone else's house, police have to be called to deal with the traffic and to deal with the noise and the quality of life of the residents. So this could be a significant amount of money also. Not that that's the reason you should not have protests, but it should be acknowledged that public safety money, taxpayer money is spent. I'm just wondering, Brianna, and do we know, and it's an important question because, because this issue is in the paper almost every day, but do we know the level of or the amount of taxpayer money on police that have responded to various demonstrations, whether it's my house, whether it's the superintendent of schools, whether it's the mayor? Our councilors have also been subjected to some of this. I would be interested in knowing how much money we are spending on public safety.
Thank you for your question, Council President Flynn. I do not have the answer to that at that time, but I think, as Councilor Arroyo said, we could ask BPD these questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think it's important. We also would address the issue of Boston to weigh in on that issue, as I do and other people do. But certainly, I would bet some of the Boston police at some of these locations are there because they were ordered to, which they should be, but on overtime as well. So it does cost the taxpayers a significant amount of money, and we should have a good idea of that. And I'm curious about that because the public protest at City Hall to me is more appropriate. There's places out in front of City Hall to publicly protest elected officials, and I think that's a much better location than going to someone's house and being disruptive. A mayor makes decisions, in the mayor, most of them are controversial. 50% of the people like them, 50% don't like them. But it doesn't necessarily mean if you dislike a position, you have the right to go out in front of someone's house and and yell and scream. I just
Absolutely does.
you know, we want to encourage young people, mothers and fathers, to get involved in politics, to run for office. And what we witnessed at the mayor's house would not encourage any young person, any young family to get involved in the political arena.
So Michelle,
it's
that's
sad.
actually
It's sad to say that, because
that's what he was talking about. That's why I asked you to tune in, because I know, like I said, I know that my viewership is not going to be very high today because the Karen retrial is going on. But I asked you to tune back in at this moment because I actually asked you a little too late. He was just talking about how much money, he asked Brianna Malore how much money it's costing to provide police detail and, you know, have police present for these protests outside of the mayor's house and outside of his house. And that's something to think about, is how much money it's costing the taxpayers for these protests. So maybe later you can like rewind and hear the whole part, because I don't remember him saying this 2 years ago. So this just like, you know, since I'm rewatching it again now, I was like, wow, he really tried to bring up the money point. Like, what about all the money spent on all the lawsuits from the vaccine mandates? What about all the money spent on all the signs for the Be Together program? What about all the money spent on all of the events and shit? What about, what did she, $2,000 was spent on her inauguration party or something? Like, all of the money spent everywhere, but you want to complain. And then he said police overtime. Like, well, maybe we wouldn't be paying so much police overtime if, one, we actually fired police when they were caught stealing overtime, and two, we didn't cause a whole bunch of them to leave or die because of vaccine mandates, right?
Because a handful of people can have a negative impact on the quality of life of thousands of people. So maybe my views are a little not in the mainstream, not in the mainstream, but that's how I feel about it. But I don't have any further questions, Chair Arroyo.
Thank you, President Flynn. I believe next is Councilor Fernandez-Anderson.
Whether you need pregnancy care or abortion care, avoid anti-abortion centers. They might look like medical clinics, but you'll limit your options.
This is what happens when you don't pay for your YouTube account. But what?
Learn more and find care you can trust.
What?
What's the difference between a service animal and an emotional support pet? Well, a service animal has to...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting because I really appreciate the conversation about sunset. I just don't know if, and I appreciate that the mayor didn't, because I would hate to think that, it's self-preserving. Like, if we do it for a term and the length of which we are to vote on the ordinance, right? So is it so specific to this mayor or for everyone? So I'm interested in hearing more on that and what my colleagues or how we hash this out. But then two, as a mother, as a woman, as just anyone, as a person, like, I don't want anyone to harass me at my home. And, yes, the First Amendment gives you the right to assembly, but peacefully assemble. And what I've seen or observed has not been peaceful. And so the thing that's putting me, in the back and forth is, if we're going to do this, then who is it going to impact? And I think that my colleague, Councilor Lara, alluded to this. Then who does it adversely impact? Who does it disproportionately impact? And in the event that it is enforced by BPD, and as well as, what is that going to turn into, right? And then as far as the noise ordinance, it does not get enforced at all unless you are white and you're calling in a Black neighborhood. So I'm very cautious into how this is going to play out, and I want to hear more again, I'm here
So
to
the
hear more
noise
of the
ordinance,
testimonies and
hold on,
seeing
let's
people's
pause right there.
perspective. But
So
I'm also
she's saying that the noise ordinance only gets enforced if you're white and you're calling in a black neighborhood. How do we know this? Do we have statistics? Do we have numbers? Do we have like dispatch calls? Do black people who live in white neighborhoods actually call to report noise? I don't know, because I've lived in white neighborhoods. I've lived in black neighborhoods. I currently live in a black neighborhood. I've never had an issue with noise living in a white neighborhood, but I've mostly lived in black neighborhoods, so maybe I'm biased. But I've never had an issue with noise in a white neighborhood. I have always experienced tons of noise living in black neighborhoods. And I'm just not the type of person that thinks that the police needs to be involved when the issue is noise, like, you know, whatever. But like, what is it the issue that the police only respond to white people calling in black neighborhoods, or is the issue that excessive noise during the quiet time of a noise ordinance doesn't occur in white neighborhoods? Like, there's so many factors to that. You just have to constantly bring it back to a race issue. And I'm going to say again, I have over 50 viewers right now across the 4 platforms that I'm on, and I have 1 or 2 people commenting. I wish people would interact with these videos. I wish people would, you know, those of you who aren't like feds and informants and, you know, trolls, or I mean, even trolls can comment, honestly. I wish people would interact with the videos, because I would love to have a conversation with somebody who disagrees with me on anything ever. I don't always need to be pumped up in the comments. But like, what are we talking about here? She says the police only respond to complaints about noise when it's a white person calling in a black neighborhood. What? Anyway, it gets more ridiculous.
On the side of not harassing people, or people having the rights to say. Arroyo and President Flynn mentioned this as a child. You know, you've observed this, and you understand that this is, you know, you don't want your mom to be called names and harassed. And I'm sure there's been, you know, aches and like there's been
if you don't want your mom, if you don't want your mom to be called names and harassed, if it's going to bother you that your child has to listen to that, and you're going to teach your child to be a victim of people's words, then don't run for public office. Don't be a public official, because I'm not elected. I have not yet been elected to public office, but I have ran for public office, and I've been in the public eye quite a bit in the past 2 years, and plenty of people have said nasty things about me, and I don't care, because I don't allow myself or my children to be victims of people's words.
Over this. And I understand that people will say, you know, well, that's what you deserve, because you took the position opposite for me. But there's never is it okay to harass someone to that level. So I just wanted to allude to those two. If
we were harassing, then Michelle Wu could have taken her ass to the courthouse to file for harassment prevention. But there would be no grounds for harassment, which is why she didn't do that.
More conversation around the sunset provision, just to make sure that we're doing it properly.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And obviously, the idea of a sunset provision, or at least the topic of which is not designed or was not proposed, designed for just this specific incident. It was obviously to recognize the need for stability, arguably. Obviously, what Council President Flynn has been talking about. I guess gone are the days when folks can agree to disagree, and protests have risen to the level of, it's threats, there's intimidation, and they can downgrade fairly quickly to a lot of other things. So I guess the idea behind a sunset wasn't for this specific, the protest obviously at the mayor's house. It was designed more to address overall the lack of civility in our city, in our state, in our country when it comes to disagreements, arguably whether they're political or they're policy driven. So I just want to make sure folks understand sort of where that idea at least came from as to whether it makes sense to put a sunset clause here or not, and obviously whether or not it would withstand muster. But it wasn't designed just for this specific instance. It was to address, I think, but I just want to shift gears to Brianna. Are you an attorney? And I know you had maybe briefly read something from the law department, but I guess the bigger question for me is, where is the law department? And, this is what we pay Adam Seidenbaum for, frankly. And so he needs to be on this call. If not, then I need to hear from him at some point today on this issue. We've got an issue. We've got an ordinance in front of us that intertwines. There are some legal issues with it. My colleagues and clearly folks that will be testifying will have questions about. And we have a law department, corporation counsel, not sure what they're doing. They're probably just listening, but they should be participating, Brianna. And so unless you're an attorney and that have specific authorization from the law department, an attorney from the law department should be at this hearing. And that shows sort of a lack of respect for the legislative body, as well as for this ordinance, the fact that they're not here. And so that's my 2 cents. So Brianna, are you an attorney?
I am not. I am not an attorney, but I'm happy to connect you with the legal office. They did send a lengthy letter addressing the First Amendment concerns that people had. So
right. So Brianna, why isn't the law department here representing?
Because they
the
can't take
administration
people
on this
on
ordinance?
serious constitutional violations.
I can speak for myself. I'm here to represent the community.
They support.
In this instance, in the neighborhoods and the impacts that it has on the neighborhoods, but I'm happy to have legal answer and follow-up questions that need to happen.
That's true. And thank you, Brianna. This isn't directed at you, obviously, through the chair. Adam Seidenbaum and or his team should be at this hearing. The fact that they're either just listening in or they're underneath it.
Adam Seidenbaum doesn't want to face the people who he was outside of City Hall taking pictures of back in January and February of 2022 with a mask on his face. Boston City Hall's legal counsel, Adam Seidenbaum, the head of the legal department, outside taking pictures of us on his cell phone. Obviously doesn't want to come to a public hearing where we're all present and we may ask him the question of why were you in our faces taking close-up pictures of our faces, Adam Seidenbaum.
Their desks. Not sure what it is, but they should be on this hearing participating as we noodle through the intricacies of this ordinance and or what, if any, rights, laws, and freedoms potentially get traversed. So that's my opine for this morning, and my disappointment that the law department is not front and center answering questions and or assisting us with the process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And I would just say that I agree that they likely that is my deepest hope, that they be there to work through that language with us. Councilor Mejia.
And just briefly, Mr. Chair, just if you could inquire from the law department, can we just assess what's their annual budget? How many attorneys are in the department? What their salaries are, and I guess and what their role is as it pertains to city government and or their advocacy on behalf of the corporation. So I'd like to get those answers in advance of that working session. Their overall budget, what we pay for outside counsel, why we need outside counsel, why are we handling stuff inside, how many attorneys do we have, and what are those attorneys' functions as it pertains to protecting the corporation and participating in policy, etc.
We've taken those questions down. I'll make sure to send those over. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you.
Councilor Mejia, followed by Councilor Lara, and then back to Councilor Flynn, Council President Flynn.
I just want to echo some of the same comments that my previous colleague mentioned in terms of the law department not being here. And I'm also here to listen, so I'm just going to go on mute for the rest of the stuff. Okay, thank you.
This game.
Again, this is
You're
what
not ready
happens when
for
you YouTube. You have to deal with commercials.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Lara, followed by Council President Flynn.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think that I have any questions, but I do have a few comments. I just want to point out that the instances that we're talking about at city councilors' homes, about when we're talking about harassment, when we're talking about threats, that those are not
no
protests.
harassment. No
Threatening
threats.
someone's family is not a protest. Vandalizing someone's home is not a protest. Right? And so I want us to be careful when we're having a conversation about protesting and picketing, that we are not saying that we are supportive of this thing because X, Y, and Z has happened to us, or we have seen X, Y, and Z happen, when none of those things could be ultimately defined as being protest. We're also having a conversation about what's appropriate to protest.
So before we get into this, like, shit show that is about to come out of this woman's mouth, she's talking about she's saying we're not talking about the First Amendment here. We're not talking about protest here. We're talking about harassment and threatening somebody's family and vandalism. Like, hi, this isn't a meeting about the 2020 George Floyd riots. This is a meeting about the 2022 protest in front of Michelle Wu's house, which did not include any harassment, did not include any threats of any sort made to or by anybody, and definitely did not include any vandalism. So and then she just right when I paused it, she said, what types of things are appropriate to protest? What? Somebody needs to give this girl a class on the First Amendment and Article 16 of the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, because she has no idea what free speech even means, clearly. And look at how sure of herself she is. She's like, this is my realm. I'm the activist here. I know what I'm talking about. Like, she's so fucking confident in her stance here that she is violating the shit out of people's rights. And she has no clue. She thinks that just because she doesn't agree with our cause or our messaging, that it's not appropriate for us to protest these things.
Protests are meant to be disruptive. And as people who are in power, we don't get to tell our constituents when it's appropriate or when it feels good or when it's best for us that they show up to protest. The Montgomery bus boycott cost the government a bunch of money. We're talking about people, if we want to act like this ordinance is somehow content neutral, yes, it was written to be content neutral and it is legally sound in the way that it is content neutral, but this ordinance is a response to a specific thing. If we want to stop talking about it as if it's not a response to a specific thing, then let's look at protest as protest. People who are out fighting for their civil rights and fighting for their civil liberties.
As we were,
we
Kendra.
do not get to tell them when protests won't disturb us.
Right.
Protests are meant to be that.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about this ordinance passing legal scrutiny because we need to stay content neutral, it is not content neutral. It was written as a response to a specific kind of protest. We and councilors, us, have had, and other people who came before us, other mayors, have had people protesting outside of our homes for generations. And this has never been something that has been on the tables. And all of the comments and the conversation that we're having are about the people who are outside of Mayor Wu's house and people who have been outside of our own homes or of our families' homes doing things that could not be defined as a protest. I think it's an incredibly privileged stance to take, to say that because something hasn't been criminalized before, that it won't be in the future, or because it hasn't been criminalized for a specific community, that it will be the same for other. The reality is that the Boston Police Department has some discretion about how they enforce. And discretion allows for political bias to inform enforcement. And if we leave that open without we're talking about that this is really targeted. It needs to be more targeted. If we leave it open, then we leave it for everybody's political bias, as we have seen. We've seen women's marches where nobody has Black Lives Matter marches where 200 people get arrested without any violent outburst on either of them. We know this to be true. All of the data that we have about how police and policing happens in the city shows that it is not done in an equitable way. And so I think we need to take our heads out of the sand in saying that we can for sure say that this is not going to be criminalized, that we can for sure say that this is going to be implemented to the spirit and the letter of this ordinance. And if we are speaking truthfully and saying that we don't know for a fact that this is going to be implemented to the spirit and the letter of this ordinance, because all of the data that we have shows the contrary, then we need to ask ourselves as a body if we are willing to take that chance, not only for ourselves, but for the marginalized communities and our constituents in the city. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. I see Councilor Murphy has her hand up. I want to go to Councilor Murphy. And then I'll go to Council President Flynn, and then I will take my opportunity to speak, and then we'll go back around for a second round as necessary. So Councilor Murphy, the floor is yours. You're muted.
Now I'm here to speak. Sorry. So thank you, Chair, and also to all my colleagues. I really appreciate this opportunity to hear. I know this is a big issue and something very important that we need to work through together and kind of get the different perspectives. So I do just want to share my feelings that, I don't feel comfortable taking away people's rights or telling them when their rights can be exercised. But at the same time, I do believe that any threatening or harassing behavior towards our mayor or anyone, not just elected officials, should never be tolerated. So if that is happening, and I know
again, somebody who lacks or who ignores their responsibility to do the research before speaking on a matter, or to even have their employees do the research for them before speaking on the matter. For everybody who is on the conservative side of things in Boston, or people speculating about what happens in Boston and thinks that Erin Murphy is the most conservative candidate last year, or was the most conservative person on the council, or whatever, she's a Democrat, first of all. Second of all, listen, she doesn't even know what she's talking about. Even Tanya said that she drove through the protests while they were happening. I don't believe her, because I'm pretty sure that I would have seen her. We would have noticed her driving through. But Erin Murphy says about harassment and threatening, pay attention. Listen to the people who are asking for your help, you being considered one of the more moderate Democrats on city council. There was no harassment. There was no threatening. Okay. The only time things got that way were when Michelle Wu's husband, Connor Pewarski, was intimidating intimidating women outside, either whether it be in front of their house or walking down the street in parades, intimidating women, walking up to women, calling them names, and making it clear to women protesters that he knew their names and that he knows where they live. And that was Michelle Wu's husband who was intimidating women. That was the only time things got anywhere near threatening or intimidating, was by her husband and by the public officials surrounding her, by the Boston police detective, sergeant, I don't even know what his title is, Boston police, one of her dignitary team, the leader of her dignitary team, Carrie Chin from the Boston police, would manhandle women at those protests. There were a couple times where he literally threw women to the ground, when every single person that was protesting at Michelle Wu's house had at one point been extremely close to Michelle Wu, and nobody has ever tried to be violent in any way. Nobody has ever tried to get any closer than within a foot or two from where she's standing, and only to yell at her and to shame her. Nobody has ever tried to do anything physical or even remotely threatening or intimidating, but the police are always the ones who try to escalate things to make it look like something that it's not. So when these city councilors are talking about harassment and threats, this conversation in this hearing that happened on March 14th, 2022 happened before any of those of us who were protesting Michelle Wu had ever had conversations with any of these city councilors. So I think now in 2024, there's a few of these people who were city councilors then who maybe think they made the wrong decision, or, shouldn't have voted to pass the ordinance. I mean, Erin Murphy also voted no. She didn't vote to pass the ordinance. But the point is, she didn't do any research. Nobody ever reached out to us. Nobody ever tried to talk to us. Nobody ever asked us why we were protesting, why we were so relentlessly protesting, why we were going to her house, if there was any way that they could find a resolution with us. Nothing. We were never approached by any of these people who are sitting here saying that we're racist, that we're hateful, that we're misogynistic, that we're anti-LGBTQ, that we're harassing somebody, that we're harassing somebody's family, or that we're threatening anybody in any way. None of these people ever reached out to us. None of these people ever tried to talk to us. None of these people responded to us. None of these people tried to come to a resolution with us. Nothing. And they know who we are. They knew who we were then. They know who we are now. They never tried to talk to us about why we were doing what we were doing. None of them. But they can sit there and say that we were harassing and that we were threatening, which is all bullshit. Erin Murphy included. It just pisses me off because Sean and I both were the only conservative candidates running for Boston City Council last year. The only candidates to talk about how much every resident, the majority of residents in the city of Boston, hate bike lanes and bus lanes and don't want them. And the only two candidates to talk about illegal immigration at all. No other candidate talked about illegal immigration and the Boston Trust Act, which is the sanctuary city law in Boston. No other candidate talked about any of that. And Sean and I did. And the conservative people chose to support Erin Murphy and Brittany Walsh over Sean and I. For what reasons, I don't know. But that's what happened. And it just pisses me off because these people are not who you think they are. But anyway, go on.
Others have said this or talked about this, like what supports do we have in place right now? Or what more can we do to make sure that that is being stopped? And I do know my 80-year-old neighbor, Auntie Kay, lives on Poplar Street. So she does know when the noise comes and when the protesters are out there, and that stretch of time when they were making a lot of noise. There are noise ordinances, and the neighbors also do have rights. But I do believe that we can take care of that in other ways than maybe having this go through as taking away people's rights to protest. So I do appreciate this conversation, and I hope we can continue this working session before it comes to a vote to really have a good understanding of how we can come to some agreement on making sure we're doing the right thing, but not taking away people's rights. And I appreciate what my colleagues have said. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Now, just my questions for Chief Miller. Do we have a count of how many 311 complaints have been made about these protests happening in Rosendale?
Yes, so we currently have about 14 complaints through 311 about specifically Augustus Ave.
Okay, because I know that I have actually seen both in our community threads, in my inbox, dozens of phone calls that we've received about this issue. Just lots, including today. I would be interested in why we haven't enforced the actual sound noise ordinances. That would be very interesting information to me as to why that hasn't happened when this has been the largest part of the complaints that I have received, the second largest being sort of on the content of what's being yelled. But the noise itself is what I think has been most disruptive in that way. I'm not sure I have any other questions for you, Chief. And I see that we still have 3 hands up. I'm going to go in order that the hands went up. And then Chief Miller, thank you for your time. We'll go to public comment. Council President Flynn, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I was wondering, the letter we received from the legal department, the law department, are you able to summarize it? What did it say? Or I understand they did send down a letter. I was just curious of what they said.
Sure. So I read it out at just to summarize, but I'm happy to do it again here. The letter is about 4 pages long.
Okay.
The department cites a similar ordinance which was upheld in the case of Frisbee v. Schultz and found to be lawful. That case set the standards for this kind of legislation that's before us today. The department specified that the ordinance before this body is not content specific, which is a legal determination that is required for something like this by the courts, and leaves open channels of communication. The department also reiterated that the goal is to protect the privacy of residents in their homes. And so that's the Cliff Notes version of that 4-page letter. It's more in depth than that, obviously, but it's there. And just because it hasn't been done yet, for folks who are sort of tuning into and trying to figure out what we are talking about, this ordinance specifically targets picketing, protesting, or demonstrating toward a specific residence in residential areas. It takes effect from 9 p.m. until 9 a.m., making it unlawful to do so at those times from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. Violation of the ordinance would result in a fine of $100 for the first offense, $200 for the second offense, and $300 for a third offense. And that obviously would be enforced by the Boston Police Department, which is why, if you've heard us speaking about the noise ordinance and other ordinances that we have that haven't been enforced, there's some questions as to what would make this different from that. And so thank you, Councilor Flynn. I don't know if you have any further questions.
Yeah, I have one further question and one comment, Mr. Chair. Did we consider, maybe with the exception, maybe not doing, is that more effective than a fine? Is that more inclusive in terms of, you don't want to penalize someone that feels that they have to go to someone's house, take money out of their pocketbook. But is it a compromise to have a stay away order without a fine?
I think that's something worth asking the law department. The one thing I would just say is the stay aways, in my experience as a public defender, where you see stay away orders, you see sort of harassment orders, you see those kinds of orders, but they require court hearings and things of that nature. Whereas I think the fine is probably more streamlined. And then obviously they would require enforcement for the stay away, which I think could actually lead to an arrest on the violation of the stay away. So those are the kinds of issues when you get into those kind of measures. But I'm happy to kick that over to the law office to see what their determinations were, why they came to this specific fine of 100, 200, 300, and how that matches or does not match what the fine is for a violation of the noise ordinance. So those are the kinds of things that I think are valid questions that I'll send over that way.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Roy. And then my final comment, I guess, as I was reading the newspaper about the demonstrations out in front of the mayor's house. Read them closely. There was one, I forget if it was a man or a woman, regardless, but this person was a veteran dealing with PTSD related issues. And that type of noise and that type of disturbance out in front of your house at 7 o'clock in the morning is very unhealthy for someone with PTSD or mental health challenges. We do a lot of work on this council also on supporting families, supporting elderly people, persons with disabilities, but it should be also factored in that these demonstrations really impact negatively the quality of life And again, I'm for a balance that works, some type of reasonable compromise. That's what this council and the mayor want to see, is a reasonable compromise. So I don't have any further questions or comments, but just want to say thank you to the chair for conducting this meeting, and for my colleagues for very good comments too.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I will just say, one of the emails I received.
So I just wanted to comment on what he just said, what Ed Flynn just said about a stay away order. Like, this is how I don't even know the word other than stupid and brainless that these city councilors are, because again, if you're talking about a stay away order, then you would be criminalizing our protesting that we're doing, for one. And again, you're pointing out how targeted this legislation is. This legislation was put in place to silence a very specific small group of people who were opposing Michelle Wu's policies. And every time a counselor speaks, it's about us. Every time everybody speaks, this entire thing was about us. It was used to criminalize what we were doing, to silence us, because we were effective in embarrassing and shaming Michelle Wu. That's all it's about. So when he talks about a stay away order, he is right on point with the fact that this is a self-serving ordinance used to protect Michelle Wu from having to hear dissent from her constituents. And that's how stupid he is, that he doesn't realize that he's helping our side of the argument when he says things like this. Neither does Kendra Lara or any of these other counselors that keep talking about the protest in front of Michelle Wu's house. You're helping our argument. And you helped to pass legislation that silenced a specific group of people. I don't know how to be more clear
in
about
this
that.
time of hybrid and from working from home. One of the emails that I've received is about somebody who's had their work disrupted, who has had a hard time trying to figure out how to work in this area from home. And so these are the kinds of things that we have to figure out what the balance is here, because these folks are not elected officials, did not take on this kind of job that requires sort of a daily public scrutiny and public interaction that I think is part of the job and is an acceptable part of the job. But they haven't signed up for that. And I think when we start to get into a place where we're going after families, going after children, which, we could say what we want. If you're protesting and yelling outside of a house while somebody's getting ready for school and calling their mom names and doing all that stuff, it's not the equivalent of like the freedom riders. It's really not. And it is happening every day. And so those kinds of things really do have to get taken into account.
That's the thing,
because
is that
there's children,
Ricardo
there are seniors.
Arroyo and Kendra Lara and Ed Flynn and Ruthie Louis Jean and Kenzie Bach and Aaron Murphy and all of these counselors, you don't get to decide that our cause, that the topic that we are advocating for or against, is any less important. Freedom in history or whatever you're comparing it to, you don't get to decide. You don't get to decide that this is not important. You don't get to decide that it's not a topic or a cause worthy of this type of public scrutiny of the mayor. You don't get to decide that because you don't agree with how passionately we feel about this particular cause, that we should be silenced, as opposed to a group of people protesting a landlord outside of their residence for evicting somebody. Our cause is not less important than that. It is not. No cause is. Because when somebody feels passionately about creating public awareness for a cause, then it's to them to decide how important it is, not you who is passing legislation to silence it. And for the record, also, these city councilors clearly, like, the only protests in front of residences that they're concerned about are those of public officials, because they're perfectly fine with landlord protests. They're perfectly fine with any other type of protest that targets private citizens. but they don't want public officials to be protesting in front of their homes, is what they're saying. Even though the ordinance has never been enforced anywhere but at Michelle Wu's house.
There are folks working from home. They are all entitled to, frankly, the same peace that we would want for our communities. I represent this area, so I might be, I might be a little bit more sensitive to it because I've received so many of these phone calls and I know what's going on there in that sense. But
No,
it's been a lot. And I think if we're just saying that you can do that, all of the things I just said, because they frankly have been doing that, but from 9 a.m. until 9 p.m., which is after the sun goes down, frankly, which is, I think, also a thing, but it's after the sun goes down. So we're saying from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 12 hours, have at it. I really don't see the distinction here with
what you're
has to
saying
happen
with
at
the
7.
9 a.m. thing, whereas when we were protesting, we always started around 7 a.m. or after 7 a.m., never before 7 a.m. because we weren't trying to be in violation of the already existing noise ordinance. What you're saying by we're only asking you to push it back a couple hours so that people can get their sleep. No, 9 a.m. is well long after Michelle Wu leaves for work. The only time that we could be heard by Michelle Wu while we were protesting Michelle Wu's policies was at this time in this location. We didn't have the option of going to City Hall. I actually got arrested for protesting at City Hall. So, fun fact about that, for blowing a whistle outside of City Hall. I have the option of going to City Hall. One, because when we first started protesting at Michelle Wu's house, they closed down City Hall because we had already had a big protest there and they didn't like it. So when they heard that we were coming back, they closed City Hall for 2 weeks, claiming a spike in COVID cases. And that 2-week period was also, it ended past the day that her Be Together program was going to be implemented, whatever. So they closed City Hall for the whole period of time leading up to the vaccine mandates going into effect. And that's what it was about. It was about them not having to hear about, the people who had the problems with Michelle Wu's policies.
A.m. or 8 a.m. I recognize protests are disruptive, but there are.
And the point of it being 9 a.m. was after Michelle Wu left her house. So Michelle Wu left her house anywhere from like 8 a.m. to 8:30. So there was no point in being there at 9 a.m. because she would be gone. And there were a few occasions where there was less of a police presence while we were protesting because she had already left before we got there and we didn't know. So everything was made way bigger of a deal while she was home. But on days that she wasn't home when we were there, they just let us go on and didn't say anything to us.
The reality is I've never actually seen this kind of sustained effort at somebody's home ever, period. Regardless of whether it was Mayor Flynn, Mayor Walsh, I've never seen this. And so, we can say what we want about all of these different things about how this might impact other folks. I've never seen folks of color, period, do this to elected officials in this manner for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on end. So
what? Like, have you not heard of Monica Cannon Grant? First of all, you've never seen folks of color do this to elected officials. Didn't Monica Cannon Grant say that she protested Marty Walsh for like 200 days straight or some shit? What? And then she got handed a building in an organization that she got to run and ultimately ended up stealing from? You've never heard people of color do this? And there were people of color with us doing these protests. So what are you talking about? Every single thing that they do is try to race bait and make everything be an argument about race. There were black people with us. There were Asian people, white people with us. There were protest signs made in other languages. And you would know that if you ever actually came to a protest or if you ever actually tried to build any bridge with those of us who were protesting. Again, none of these city councilors ever attempted to talk to us. They never reached out to us. They never responded to us. We had to approach them, asking them questions. And every time we did, we got brushed off. They never tried to talk to us. And that's why they don't know what the truth is of what we were doing out in front of Michelle's house, because all they did was listen to the media and Michelle Wu. And it was a bunch of lies that they were hearing and advocating in support of.
I just want to be clear about what we're talking about there.
You're not clear.
Because this is different. I just want to be clear, this is different. And if we're gonna talk about it seriously, I have the same questions other councilors have raised. Why aren't we enforcing the laws that are already on the books on this? Why aren't we? I know there was a meeting at E5 with my community where E5 being the police station, that's how seriously they took this, where we had a community meeting at the police station because folks had this going on for weeks on end. I feel for them. I am likely voting for this because of that. And so these are the kinds of things that, I just want to make sure we're clear. This probably isn't necessarily going to fix it. Folks are still going to do protests. Sit-ins aren't legal, but we still do them. So like, these are the kinds of things where I just think that there's a hope here that we can get to a civil place and that we can keep it centered on, if you want to go after elected officials, there's ways to do that without going after their families and their neighbors. And so with that, I know Councilor Lara's had her hand up, and then I know Councilor Fernandez-Anderson has had her hand up, and then I see Councilor Flynn's hand went up. So in that order, if we can go Councilor Lara, Councilor Anderson, or was Councilor Anderson, were you first? So Councilor Anderson, Councilor Lara, then Councilor Flynn. Thank you.
Nope, my turn. No, thank you, Councilor. I want to thank my sister, Councilor Lara, for bringing up such important points about, protests and our rights and racial justice and those who it disproportionately impacts. With that being said, to your point, Councilor Arroyo, it is vastly different. Like, it is not the same. Montgomery and other situations, Black people, people of color have not done this to electeds in this way. And this is totally different. When it begins to get abusive, then I wonder though, what population are we dealing with, right? So my job, right, or our job, I'll speak for myself, is that we consolidate community and that we represent. In that same sense, I'm thinking about the people that are protesting. If their resolve is so abusive, if their disposition is so offensive to this point, then you have to question, what is their state? What's going on? Why is it okay? Why is Mayor Wu different? And then what makes them go to that extreme? So I wonder, and allow me just for a bit, I don't know if this is a good idea, but I wonder then if we need a third party intervention so that we can, one, address the issues that Councilor Lara is talking about, so that we put this in.
What is the need for a third party intervention when there isn't even a two-party conversation happening? Is my question to you, Tanya. None of you ever tried to talk to us. None of you ever tried to figure out why we were doing what we were doing, why we were doing it so relentlessly. If it were actually harassing, if it were actually threatening, none of you ever did any of that. So what are you talking about? Third party intervention. You need a third party intervention when the two parties at hand cannot come to a resolution. But one of the two parties never attempted to come to a resolution. So why would you need a third party? Okay. And again, with the fucking race baiting, it has nothing to do with anybody's race. And why Michelle Wu? Because this is when I started on my activism journey. And this is what was happening that I felt so passionately about that I needed to get involved in advocating against. Okay. Had Marty Walsh been mayor while all of these things were happening and it were his policies being put into place, I would be at his house in Lower Mills. Okay. It has nothing to do with anybody's race. And I will guarantee you 100% of the people who were in front of Michelle Wu's house would have been in front of Marty Walsh's house had it been him in Lower Mills. Okay. Or, and some of those same people were in front of Michael Flaherty's house in Southie. And some of those same people were in front of Ed Flynn's house in Southie, and in front of Margaret Cook's house in Boston, in the West End. Okay. So to say that it has anything to do with race is bullshit. To even call Michelle Wu a woman of color is bullshit because she's white. Okay. Just her being a different ethnicity with white skin, I don't understand how that makes her a person of color, but it has nothing to do with race. And again, there were Black people there too protesting her. So to say that you've never seen Black people act like this, they were there. So if you had actually ever really driven by there like you said you did, then you did see it because they were there with us Black people and Asian people and Latino people. Okay. So it's just all nonsense, the things that these counselors have to say and the race baiting that they resort to. And yeah, right. Wu is a white Asian. Okay. How do you call her? If Wu was in Taiwan, which is allegedly what her ethnicity is, Taiwanese, if she were there, would she be considered a person of color? Or would the people with brown skin, who are also Taiwanese, be the people of color versus Michelle Wu, whose skin is closer to white? That's why I don't talk about race when I talk about issues, because race is not a factor about almost anything. Okay. It's a made up social construct that has absolutely zero effect on anything and shouldn't be on applications and forms or anything like that, because the only reason why we use these terms Black and white is to divide the people and give us this mental illusion that there's some type of difference between people with lighter skin and people with darker skin when there isn't. But anyway, go on. She's going to talk about how we're crazy and we need a fucking third party intervention
into this ordinance, but also some sort of intervention or some sort of third party, so that we are ensuring that we're not going into the other end of things, the other extreme end of things on impacting our communities as well. But also, again, like what is our state of mind when we are in front of a person's house, a woman's house, and we are abusive? So I just have those questions. And again, if we can explore, is there a way for us to talk to BPD and look?
Because we're not abusive, Tanya. We're exercising our First Amendment rights and our Article 16 of the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights. We're exercising those rights. We're not being abusive. We are shaming her and embarrassing her, which is what you are legally allowed to do to a public official who is being a dictator, who is overstepping their authorities and privileges as an elected official. All of these things are well within our rights. There's nothing abusive about it at all. What's abusive is when somebody takes their power to a level where they have control over people's lives, people's health, people's well-being, and people's employment. That's abusive. What's abusive is putting restraints on people's God-given rights, because when we express them, it makes you feel uncomfortable, or it makes the mayor feel uncomfortable. That's being abusive. You're abusing your power that you unfortunately have at this point in American society. Elected officials have this power because we've ignored things for so long that we let it get to this point where they do have power over us, and you guys are abusing that power. That's what's abusive here, not us who are just simply exercising our rights and voicing our concern and disagreement and upset over the policies that cost thousands of Boston workers their jobs. Sorry that you don't agree with that cause. Sorry that you don't care that people were moving out of Boston and leaving their jobs in Boston and being threatened to be fired from their jobs in Boston because you folded and took the vaccine. You feel like it doesn't affect you. I don't know, but that doesn't mean that we have less rights than you do. And that doesn't mean that we're mentally unstable or that we're, there's something wrong with us because we're so passionate about advocating for people losing their livelihoods over an experimental jab.
Look at into third-party interventions so that we can avoid the opposite extreme. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we might make a request, because we're going to be asking DPD to enforce this, that DPD be present at the working session as well, so that folks can ask those questions there directly to them. Councilor Lara, followed by President Flynn, and then we'll be going to public comment. In order to have public testimony, you need to sign up. So if you are an attendee and you have not signed up for public comment, the way to do that is to email Christine.O'Donnell@boston.gov. That is Christine, CHRISTINE.O'Donnell, ODONNELL with your name, so that you can sign up for public comment. Everybody who emails Christine O'Donnell will be given a chance to speak. The question before you, just so that you can do this, make sure, please, that if you're an attendee, you get your Zoom ready for public comment so that it has the name that you've given Christine O'Donnell, which should be a first name and a last name, to speak. So first name, last names, no one names, no initials, first name, last name, so that we can call on you when it is your turn to speak. And with that, Council President Flynn.
Can I just say my goodbyes? I know that I still want to just hop off.
Thank you, Chief.
No problem. Thank you to the counselors, and thank you to all the community and residents that are going to be giving public testimony today. I do have staff on to kind of take everything back and hopefully work together on this in the working session. I do want to underscore my role in this conversation is really uplifting and empowering the voices of community, and how this does deeply impact our residents and our neighbors. And our role is to proactively protect our neighbors, and I look forward to kind of partnering this in the future. So thank you all.
Thank you. Councilor Lauer.
Thank you.
And I just want to note, we've been joined by Councilor Lydia Edwards, and I'll go to her directly after Councilor Flynn.
Brianna Malore's job is not to protect anybody's neighbors. She wasn't elected. She was appointed by the mayor. She works for the mayor, not for the people, even though we do pay her salary. And Brianna Malore says that she's here to uplift and empower the voices of the community, the voices of the people of Boston, but then she leaves the hearing before any members from the public speak.
But Councilor Lauer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to bring up a couple of points from your comments specifically, particularly around, and also Councilor Fernandez-Anderson's of like, oh, this is different, right? When young people are going outside of Mayor Marty Walsh's home because they're asking for more youth jobs, they're there, they have their protest, they're there for 2 hours and they go, right? This level of, it is different. The issue is that this ordinance, because it's content neutral, will also apply to the people who are just going to go to someone's home to have a regular protest and then leave. There is an inability for us to target the repetitive nature of the protest legally. And so I wanted to bring that up because the problem is the repetitive nature. Right? This has been going on for 9 weeks, but legally we can't target the repetitive nature, because if we say, no more than 7 days within a 30-day limit, then you can't figure out who was there, and you get in, you're wading into the water of saying that John has used up Mary's First Amendment right because John has been there for 3 days and now Mary can't be there because it's been 7 days. So this is a part of the issue, is that in all of the ways that we can make this ordinance very specific, so that it minimizes the amount of harm, we have kind of like the legal boundaries around what we can do, because we're kind of playing with the First Amendment here, which is why I believe that we don't take the risk. Because so I would be supportive if we were targeting the repetitive nature, the harassing nature of the protest. Legally, we can't do that. And yes, we've never seen this happen with other movement organizers, because we are people who live in neighborhoods, and we don't want our neighbors to be harassed either. But the reality is that we can't. If we pass this ordinance, it's not gonna discriminate.
No, Kendra, you've never seen this happen with any other groups, because no grassroots movement has been effective the way that we have, that you've seen. And you think that grassroots is something that it's completely not. Every movement you've been a part of is part of the establishment's controlled opposition plan.
In the sense that anybody, whether you're peaceful, whether you've been there for an hour, whether you've been there for 2, whether you've been there for 9 weeks, will have to feel the impact of it.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. And I do think that the repetitiveness is really what has caused much of the disturbance, right? Those other situations were sort of one and dones. And this is a very different thing. And so, Councilor Flynn, so thank you, Councilor Lara. Councilor Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak again, and I promise this will be my last time speaking. But I wanted to highlight one issue. I was with the mayor at Whittier Street Health Center several weeks ago, a couple months ago rather, and one of the reporters asked me about the protest out in front of the mayor's house, and I said, you know, when my father was mayor, we also had demonstrations. There was demonstrations out in front of Mayor Flynn's house. There was demonstrations under Mayor Menino's house. There were demonstrations at Mayor Walsh's house, but never to the extent and the aggressiveness that we see out in front of Mayor Wu's house. The demonstrations under the white mayors was professional. It was respectful. And the demonstration out in front of Mayor Wu's home was personal. It was vindictive. It was mean-spirited. And I said this at the time, and some people will get upset with me again, but I'm going to say it again anyway. I think a lot of this has to do with Mayor Wu being a woman and Mayor Wu being a woman of color, because it certainly didn't happen under Mayor Flynn. It certainly didn't happen under Mayor Menino, and it certainly didn't happen under Mayor Walsh. And now we have a woman of color, and now we have this vicious and extremely aggressive protesting out in front of Mayor Wu's home. So I know many people disagree with me, but I stand by my comment. And you know, that also has to be part of the discussion. It's the white elephant in the room, and I think it's important that we at least acknowledge it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, President Flynn, for your leadership. Honored to have you as our president. Councilor Edwards, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for being delayed in this conversation. I understand the balance of concerns and rights in terms of First Amendment and the ability to hold public officials accountable, even if it makes them uncomfortable. I myself have been, myself and 8 other city councilors debate that when we voted for the budget in 2020, and people came in the middle of the night and put things on our homes. So this is being held accountable is one thing, but what I feel is somewhat reasonable, and this version is, one, we already have the law, but 2, it's a 2-hour shift. Because I do think there's one thing between being held accountable and then using the ability to just simply harass somebody. And I do wonder why 7 a.m. the insistence on keeping the 7 a.m. as a part of the opportunity to get in front of someone's house, I can't think why that is, except to be able to harass them, to wake them up, to cause discomfort. And that's not the same as being able to convey a message to people. I think it's really important that we really ask ourselves, what are we pushing for and what are we allowing for? We don't have a governor's mansion. We don't have a mayor's mansion. Our elected officials live in community. And the question is, when we live in community, while you're trying to hold me accountable, for example, how much does my elderly neighbor need to suffer as a result of you wanting to send a message to me? And I think that this is allowing for our elderly, for our folks with children, for our folks who are not political, who happen to be in a neighborhood where a politician lives, to continue to live in peace and quiet. I think to a certain extent, Mayor Wu's is an example, but I think it's more important to ask ourselves, if it's not Mayor Wu, it could be a city official that we don't like, it could be the police commissioner, it could be a lot of people who aren't elected that will be impacted by this particular law. Now, the state law, that's a little different. That is actually talking about targeting elected officials, which I have a little bit more of a concern about this. But this is a matter of peace, not so much peace, but the ability to hold accountable without causing harm and harassing other people who are not related to those decisions, who have no power over that decision, but are now losing at least 2 hours of sleep. I think it's reasonable. It still allows for people to come out there, have their voices heard, 9 o'clock to 9 o'clock. And I think it still allows for the level of discomfort that you feel is necessary for the elected official, but it doesn't cause harm. And I think that that's where the difference is. So I fully support this measure. For those who are concerned about First Amendment rights, I think you need to be moving forward. There should be a greater discussion as to whether we should have this ordinance at all. So if you're talking about scrapping the entire thing, that's a different conversation and a different ordinance. This is about adjusting already existing law 2 hours. So, yeah. So I just want to go on record in support. I acknowledge it's a matter of holding people accountable and making them uncomfortable, but I do think the 2 hours moved it to just that versus causing harm to people who had no impact and no ability to control any of these, some of the decisions that you're opposing. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And with that, we are now going to proceed to public comment. We have many people signed up for public comment today. Before we begin,
I just want to reiterate that the ordinance doesn't say anything about noise. So where Lydia Edwards says, and where other councilors say that this is just stretching, this is just adding another 2 hours to the beginning and end of the already existing noise ordinance. No, it's not. Because the picketing ordinance says nothing about noise. If I were standing in front of Michelle Wu's house with or without a sign, I would be given a citation according to this ordinance. So it's nothing. It doesn't say anything about noise. So that is false. It is not just an extension of the already existing noise ordinance.
I just want to make a few things clear. Public testimony is a means by which members of the public can provide comments on the matters discussed at a committee hearing. There is no back and forth between the public and councilors or panelists. There is no question and answer session. You should think of this as an opportunity to provide feedback and raise concerns. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. We'll have a timer running. When I hit 2 minutes, I will mute you because we have so many folks coming to speak. It's already over 40 people. So 2 minutes, we will be tight to 2 minutes. I will have an alarm. When the alarm goes off, that is 2 minutes. The administration will be tolerated. These are really the only rules that we have. So as chair, I will give you one warning. If you continue to be profane or attack someone, then you will have to be muted and removed from the hearing. In addition, please make sure that your Zoom name matches the name under which you signed up for public testimony so that we can appropriately bump you up. People will be called in the order in which they signed up. So please make sure that your name is there so that our tech team can pop you in so that you can do your public testimony under the name which you've signed up for public testimony. And again, if you haven't signed up for public testimony yet and you are listening to this and you would like to, email christine.o'donnell@boston.gov. That is CHRISTINE.O'Donnell, ODONNELL at boston.gov. And you'll be sent a Zoom link and signed up. So with that, and just obviously if you've not signed up for public testimony, you won't be able to speak during public testimony. And with that, we are now going to go to public testimony in order of signing up. Rachel Polliner, you are first. You have 2 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I appreciate the thoughtful discussion that counselors are engaging in. I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate the difficulty of police enforcement. Though to me, there's a bigger issue, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to focus on the bigger issue. These last few years have had a horrific effect on our practices of democracy, intentional blurring of the line between facts and conspiracy theories, naming the media as an enemy, labeling violent insurrection at the US Capitol as legitimate public discourse. We have a lot to do to reassert boundaries. Counselor Mejia said that harassment is part of the job. What a sad, sad statement. Disagreement is part of the job, not harassment. The line has gotten so blurred that we think harassment is normal and acceptable. Harassment should not be normal or acceptable. School committee members and election officials and superintendents across the state are being harassed and intimidated. Many are leaving their jobs. Our democracy is hurt. The quality of life in our communities is hurt. To me, the question for your committee is, how can we reassert a boundary between protected speech and harassment and intimidation? We might have wished that individual responsibility and empathy would be sufficient to guide people to protest in civil modes. Clearly, they aren't. If people want to make their views known, there are plenty of modes and plenty of hours. Picketing at 9 a.m. can get the point across once or a few times at limited streets or outside of government buildings. Holding a forum, writing letters to the editor are separate from picketing altogether. There are many options. In fact, all of those modes get the point across better, that is, if one's goals are to raise awareness, convey a message, influence public opinion, or raise issues. So why use tactics like picketing at high decibels, outside of homes, at challenging hours, day after day after day, week after week, month after month? Those are tactics for harassing and intimidating.
You get your 2 minutes.
Oh
I just want to say, isn't it a coincidence that the first person to speak is somebody who is in support of the ordinance? And you'll notice that the second person to speak is also in support of the ordinance. What a coincidence.
Thank you. Now, Nina Lev.
Hi. Hello. Am I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I live across the street from Mayor Wu, 5 houses down. And even though you've been talking about this, I'd like to describe what the last couple months have been like for me and my neighbors. We've been woken up often daily for weeks on end at 7 o'clock with drumming, whistling, and loud shouting. And the intensity of this noise is so loud that even in the winter with all our windows down and the heat going, we can't ignore this noise. And the noise persists from 7 o'clock, exactly 7 o'clock, until the mayor leaves her house. So that might be an hour, although this morning it was well over an hour. If we go outside the house, we're confronted with the most vicious personal attack signs for the mayor, who is not only our mayor, but a friend, a neighbor, a mother, and a daughter in this neighborhood. And if we have gone down and walked by the mayor's house, the most aggressive of the protesters will accost us with conspiracy theories about the neighbor, about the mayor. And we're not any different than any other neighborhood. And I think
she forgets a very important point is that if any neighbors did walk over, they didn't get accosted. We weren't randomly yelling or arguing with passers. There were a few neighbors, maybe like one or two, that had walked by at some points that would yell at us. And we would, and somebody, not even necessarily myself, but somebody might engage with that person because that person would come up to yell at us. So for her to say that protesters accosted neighbors walking by, completely false. Completely false.
Councillor Flynn has suggested what we're doing at 7 o'clock is some of us are older or sicker or trying to sleep more. Some of us are taking our kids to daycare or leaving for work. Some of us are getting home from hospital shifts and trying to sleep after being up all night. Some of us are trying to put cranky infants back to sleep. And some of our working parents who have school-age kids might be trying to enjoy some of the few precious family moments they actually get in their life. So for these reasons, I really ask you to, I'm not a lawyer, and I really do firmly support the right to protest, the right to speech. I think these are very, very, very important considerations. So I'm glad you're thinking about this but it seems to me that that it is crafted in a narrow enough way that we're both protecting free speech and protests, and at the same time we're protecting the rights of the neighborhood. And I have another ask, but I know it's not something.
Sorry, Ms. Lev, we've hit the 2 minutes. One thing I will say for folks as we hit the 2 minutes, you can email us and we'll put the entirety of your commentary on the record. But we have so many people signed up, we have to keep it to the 2 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm sorry that we have to end it there.
I don't even understand what on the record means because the report made by the chair about this hearing doesn't even talk about any of the testimony at all. So I don't even know what they mean by on the record. But I am actually going to cut this in half because I still have like another hour and a half of this hearing. And I do think it's important to rehash this whole thing and watch it and make commentary and shed light on the process that took place while this ordinance was being talked about and, passed to silence us. But I do have to get some things done today. And I've already been on here for almost 2.5 hours going through the first half of this hearing. So I think I'll cut it in half and do the last hour and a half tomorrow. And I also just heard that Trooper Proctor is on the stand. So people probably want to go watch that because it's probably going to be an interesting day in the Karen Reed trial. But I'm going to get off here now and I will pick right back up at this exact spot tomorrow morning, hopefully closer to 8 a.m. rather than today. I got on here like past 9 o'clock. Tomorrow I'm going to try to be way earlier. So thank you guys for watching. The viewership continued to increase throughout this entire live. So whoever's watching, whether you're trolls or feds or haters or whatever, thank you for watching and helping my visibility. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Go check out boston2boston.com to get involved or to stay up to date with what's going on with like the real resistance in Boston, or to help us or keep track of our legal battles, all of that on boston2boston.com. Thank you for watching and I'll see you tomorrow.